Well, hey guys, welcome back into the Is AI Coming for Your Job podcast, the podcast where we discuss all things AI as it relates to work and life. I'm your host, Jack Forrester. Before we get started, you can send your comments or questions to aiinyourjob@gmail.com. Let me know what you do for work and how susceptible you think your job is to being augmented or replaced by AI. Also, please subscribe and rate the show on whatever platform you're using to listen. Let's get into some headlines. Our first headline is from the Washington Post. Quote, "Your Gmail and Instagram are training AI, and there's little you can do about it." Our tech columnist found Google, Meta, and Microsoft are taking your conversations, photos, or documents to teach their AI, end quote. So this is probably not the most shocking or surprising of AI headlines. We all agreed to the terms of service when we signed up for Gmail or Instagram, so it makes sense that they're using our private data to train their large language models. From that article, quote, "Unless you turn it off, Google uses your Gmail to train an AI to finish other people's sentences. It does that by analyzing how you respond to its suggestions. And when you opt in using a new Gmail function called Help Me Write, Google uses what you type to improve its AI writing too, and you can't say no. Your email is just the start. Meta, the owner of Facebook, took 1 billion Instagram posts from the public accounts to train an AI and didn't ask for permission. Microsoft uses your chats with Bing to coach the AI bot to better answer questions, and you can't stop it. Increasingly, tech companies are taking your conversations, photos, documents, and other things to teach their AI how to write, paint, and pretend to be human. You might be accustomed to them selling your data or using it to target you with ads, but now they're using it to create lucrative new technologies that could upend the economy and make big tech even bigger. We don't know yet or understand the risk that this behavior poses to your privacy, reputation, or work. But there's not much you can do about it. Our second headline is from Forbes, quote, "Tech executives warn of AI dangers and superintelligence in closed-door meetings," end quote. So this closed-door meeting happened in Washington a few weeks ago with various members of Congress. I won't get into much detail here other than to say it's encouraging to see that the technology has made an impact in Washington. And while it's not the EU, which has already passed some legislation on AI, Washington looks to be gaining some steam and will hopefully act sooner than later. Just one nugget from that closed-door meeting is that Elon Musk was there and he called for a federal department of AI. And while I think most of us agree that we don't need another federal department created, if there is one that needs to be created, probably a federal department of AI would be one that we could get behind. Our next article is from futurism.com, quote, "Meta launching AI-powered friends to talk to on Facebook," end quote. If your echo chamber wasn't echoey enough, Facebook will have you covered. Facebook hopes that these chatbots, marketed as friends, will bring young people back to Facebook. You can have a conversation with any number of various personas. From the article, quote, "For instance, an Abraham Lincoln AI could teach you about the abolition of slavery, while a travel advisor could tell you about the latest and greatest surfing destinations," end quote. These sound both noble and benign, but I'm afraid that these AI-powered friends will only encourage your overly political relatives to be even more so. Again, from the article, quote, "Those kinds of interactions could have implications on user privacy as well. Facebook already has a poor track record when it comes to user privacy, and throwing loose-lipped and misinformation-spewing chatbots into the mix certainly comes with plenty of inherent risk. Once users interact with a chatbot, it really exposes much more of their data to the company so that the company can do anything they want with that data," according to an AI ethics advisor at the University of Pittsburgh. Then there's the issue of AI chatbots hallucinating facts and spreading misinformation, end quote. So we talked about hallucinations before from these large language models in which they just come up with these funky, dreamlike outputs when you ask it something. And I don't have an example handy, but it's just an oddity. So I can't imagine this is going to play out well, right? I mean, one of the biggest concerns right now is with the looming presidential election next year. We saw how bad it was pre-AI with misinformation. What's it going to be like with AI and these chatbots telling people what they want to hear versus objective truth? So it'll be interesting to see if these AI-powered friends have any impact on that election in the coming year. So our next article is not so much an article. It's from a blog from a lady named Freya India in the UK. The title of the blog is "We Can't Compete with AI Girlfriends." I'm not one to typically highlight blogs on this podcast, but this one seems very timely, and I'll link to that blog in the show notes. And this particular blog caught traction with some folks in tech that I do follow, which is how I found it. The blog highlights what's already happening in the world of AI companions. And we just talked about Facebook launching AI chatbot friends. Well, there are other companies out there well ahead of them trying to tap into a growing market of lonely users. So this is from the blog, quote, "Ads for AI girlfriends have been all over TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook lately. Replica, an AI chatbot originally offering mental health help and emotional support, now runs ads for spicy selfies and hot role play. Eva AI invites users to create their dream companion, while Dream Girlfriend promises a girl that exceeds your wildest desires. The app Intimate even offers hyper-realistic voice calls with your virtual partner." This might seem niche and weird, but it's a fast-growing market. All kinds of startups are releasing romantic chatbots capable of having explicit conversations and sending sexual photos. Meanwhile, Replica alone has already been downloaded more than 20 million times. And even just one Snapchat influencer, Karen Marjorie, makes $100,000 a week by charging users $1 a minute to chat with the AI version of herself, end quote. Well, it's hard to imagine that the market's big enough for this influencer. I hate the term influencer and the existence of influencers. It's hard to believe that the market's big enough for influencers to be bringing in $100K a week by charging $1 a minute for someone to talk to their AI replica. But maybe I'm naive or ignorant. In any case, it shows that there's a need for folks to connect, even if that connection is synthetic or superficial. I would venture to guess that this is a multi-billion-dollar market, or will be soon. But, what are the ethical or moral concerns with this? And what effect will this have on human-to-human relationships? That blog goes in to much more detail on what's available out there and what people are using. And it does ask those questions about how, if a lonely guy has a relationship with a AI chatbot, which he's created this female or this AI avatar of a female in which he's designed her face and body to his liking. And let's say he treats her like garbage, this AI avatar. How's that going to affect his ability to interact with women in the real world, Or maybe he doesn't go back to the real world. I mean, this might be the future we're headed towards. It's hard to say, but it brings up a lot of ethical and moral concerns for sure. Our next article is from the New York Times, quote, "How to tell if your AI is conscious," end quote. In a new report, scientists offer a list of measurable qualities that might indicate the presence of some presence in a machine. Now, this still feels wild to even talk about, but these conversations aren't going away. From this article, quote, "The fuzziness of consciousness, its imprecision has made its study anathema in the natural sciences. At least until recently, The project was largely left to philosophers who often were only marginally better than others at clarifying their object of study. A roboticist at Columbia University said that some people in this field referred to consciousness as the C word. A neuroscientist at New York University said there was this idea that you can't study consciousness until you have tenure. Well, just an aside here, I would venture to guess we're going to have tons of experts on consciousness in the next few years as this debate grows. Back to the article, quote, nonetheless, a few weeks ago, a group of philosophers, neuroscientists, and computer scientists proposed a rubric with which to determine whether an AI system like ChatGPT could be considered conscious. The report, which surveys what these folks call the brand new science of consciousness, pulls together elements from a half dozen nascent empirical theories and proposed a list of measurable qualities that might suggest the presence of some presence in a machine. But it could also arise from the ability to be aware of your own awareness, to create virtual models of the world, to predict future experiences, and to locate your body in space. The report argues that any one of these features could potentially be an essential part of what it means to be conscious. And if we're able to discern these traits in a machine, then we might be able to consider the machines conscious. End quote. That's a heady subject, no doubt about it. It was difficult to even read. But wait, there's more. Quote, one of the difficulties of this approach is that the most advanced AI systems are deep neural networks that learn how to do things on their own in ways that aren't always interpretable by humans. We can glean some kinds of information from their internal structure, but only in limited ways, at least for the moment. This is the black box problem of AI. So even if we had a full and exact rubric of consciousness, it would be difficult to apply it to the machines we use every day. And the authors of this recent report are quick to note that theirs is not a definitive list of what makes one conscious. They rely on an account of computational functionalism, according to which consciousness is reduced to pieces of information passed back and forth within a system like a pinball machine. In principle, according to this view, a pinball machine could be conscious if it were made much more complex. But others have proposed theories that take our biological or physical features, social or cultural context, as essential pieces of consciousness. It's hard to see how these things could be coded into a machine. And even to researchers who are largely on board with computational functionalism, no existing theory seems sufficient for consciousness, end quote. So all that to say is there is no definitive mechanism by which we gauge consciousness as of yet in a synthetic being. But when that time comes, will it be difficult to discern if that consciousness is there, or will it be obvious? So exactly how we'll gauge consciousness in a synthetic being remains to be seen. Futurist Ray Kurzweil, who we talk about often, believes the day is coming that humans and robots will be indistinguishable in looks and action. Though I think by the time we get to that point, when robots are walking around in such a way and interacting with humans, everywhere in every action, our concern over their consciousness will probably be an issue of the past at that point. Our next article is from Forbes. Quote, Amazon plans to invest up to $4 billion in AI startup Anthropic. End quote. Not to be outdone by Microsoft or Google, Amazon is investing heavily in Anthropic. Anthropic is an AI company we don't discuss much here, but Anthropic is a major player in the field. They're typically ranked or thought of right there with OpenAI and Google. Investing in Anthropic will allow Amazon to push the technology to all of their products. If there's one company interested in hyper-personalization, certainly is Amazon. Also, I'm thinking about how Amazon has begun to integrate its technology into the home with products like Alexa. And AI will certainly supercharge Alexa from what it is now. Our next article is from the Wall Street Journal, quote, "Job security isn't enough to keep many accountants from quitting," end quote. So as you might have guessed, this article highlights the accounting field. There's a shortage of accountants currently, given the sizable amount of baby boomers leaving the profession. Those younger accountants don't see the field as rewarding, and the work-life balance isn't what they hoped it would be. But the article also states that, quote, "accountants are increasingly facing the risk of generative artificial intelligence and endangering their roles, fueling their frustration," end quote. So as the technology gets further and further ahead, I think many of these younger folks see the writing on the wall, right? We've talked about accounting here as one of the prime trades or professions that will be devoured by AI early on. It appears that folks within the profession are aware of that looming threat and taking action to get out of the field altogether before it hits. Probably a smart move. Our next article is from the New York Times, quote, "On day 146, screenwriters reached deal with studio to end their strike," end quote. So we've discussed several times on this podcast the ongoing strike from the Writers Guild of America against the studios. It appears that a tentative deal has been reached. Guild members will vote this week on whether or not to accept that deal. One of the key factors for the strike was the use of AI by studios. Obviously, scaled use of AI would threaten to put writers out of work altogether. From that article, quote, "Lawyers for the entertainment companies came up with language, a couple of paragraphs inside a contract that runs hundreds of pages, that addressed a guild concern about AI and old scripts that studios own. The side spent several hours towards the end making additional tweaks," end quote. So it's not clear exactly what that language is, but there are some guarantees that AI technology will not encroach on writers' credits and compensation. So it looks like the writers have staved off an intrusive AI for now, but it will be interesting to see how long that holds. Our final article is from The Atlantic, quote, "The unlikely world leader who just dispelled AI leaders' utopian dreams," end quote. So Bibi Netanyahu of Israel met with Elon Musk, Max Tegmark, and Greg Brockman, who's the CEO of OpenAI. Now, for many folks, Netanyahu is problematic. I get that. He can be divisive. But concerning AI, I'd argue there's no other world leader as competent in the subject matter. He was recently on the Lex Friedman podcast and discussed the subject at length. And while he's obviously not an AI researcher or computer scientist, he certainly understands the implications of such a technology, and it's encouraging to hear a world leader speak competently on the subject. This particular discussion went a different way than I think the tech bros thought it would. Netanyahu came out as an AI skeptic, which I think took the other panel members by surprise. So from that article, quote, "Netanyahu soon made clear when it comes to AI, he believes that bad outcomes are the likely outcomes. The Israeli leader interrogated OpenAI's Brockman about the impact of his company's creation on the job market. By replacing more and more workers, he argued, AI threatens to cannibalize a lot more jobs than it creates, leaving many people adrift and unable to contribute to the economy. When Brockman suggested that AI could usher in a world where people wouldn't have to work, Netanyahu countered that the benefits of the technology were unlikely to accrue to most people because the data, computational power, and engineering talent required for AI are concentrated in a few countries." He said, quote, "You have these trillion-dollar companies that are produced overnight, and they concentrate enormous wealth and power with a smaller and smaller number of people." He also noted that even a free market evangelist like himself was unsettled by such a monopolization. That will create a bigger and bigger distance between the haves and the have-nots, and that's another thing that causes tremendous instability in our world. And I don't know if you have an idea of how you overcome that, end quote. So the other panelists didn't have an answer for that, but Brockman briefly pivoted to talk about OpenAI's Israeli employees before saying, the world we shoot for is one where all the boats are rising. But other than mentioning the possibility of a universal basic income for people living in an AI-saturated society, Brockman agreed that creative solutions to this problem were needed without providing any. The conversation continued in this vein for some time. The AI boosters emphasized the incredible potential of their innovation, and Netanyahu raised practical objections to their enthusiasm. They cited futurists such as Ray Kurzweil to paint a bright picture of a post-AI world. Netanyahu cited the Bible and Jewish philosophers to caution against upending human institutions and subordinating our existence to machines. Elon Musk matter-of-factly explained that the, quote, very positive scenario of AI is actually in a lot of ways a description of heaven, where you can have whatever you want, you don't need to work, you have no obligations, any illness you have can be cured, and death is a choice. And Netanyahu incredulously retorted, this is the world you want? End quote. So I think Netanyahu raises a really good point here. Have we actually thought through this utopia we're trying to create? In many ways, what Elon described as the picture of heaven that a child might come up with. In any case, it was good to hear a world leader openly questioning the motives of these guys. Israel punches well above its weight as it relates to technology, so don't be dismissive of his take on the technology. At the very least, perhaps these tech leaders might second guess their actions, or at least the implications of the technology they're creating. All right, so this week I want to talk about the return to work, the end of or the beginning of a different phase of work from home. Most of us went home. Those of us who were lucky enough to be able to during the pandemic went home to work as we couldn't go to offices. And while many have since returned, there have been many of us who have carried on working from home up to this point. I'm one of those people, at least until recently. With summer ending and fall imminent, schools back in session, corporations in the U.S. have been adjusting their work requirements for remote workers. It seems there's been a cascading effect from larger corporations down to smaller ones. For whatever reason, 3.5 years in, it's been decided that full work from home isn't the way forward. Obviously, there's a ton of nuance and exceptions here. Some companies went fully to work from home. Some were fully work from home pre-pandemic. And some people do like to go into the office, so there are obviously exceptions. Now, I do recognize that work from home in any capacity is an absolute luxury. There are those whose work will not allow for remote work, and I recognize that. But having said that, this is the position we're in, right? Those of us who do remote work. And I've gotten a few emails on it, questions about remote work and how that factors into AI, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. So here we are. Bloomberg recently ran an article discussing what a return to work looks like around the globe. It seems, per that article, Asian countries never really had to make a hard pivot away from the office. And so it's not been a big turnaround for them. They were mostly stayed at the office. And European countries made a significant return already to the office. Naturally, European countries are working to enshrine flexible work arrangements into law. It's uncharacteristically the U.S. who's maintained a work-from-home position for as long as it has. I say uncharacteristically, as the U.S. is typically known as the place in the world that values hard work above all else, but here we are. It looks like that position is changing, at least some. With the job market tighter than it has been for the past few years, employers know they have more power than they did during the pandemic. Some companies, like Goldman Sachs, are being more rigid than others, requiring their folks in office 5 days a week. But the bulk of companies, including mine, have instituted some sort of hybrid schedule. It seems obvious, at least to me, that a hybrid schedule will help attract and retain employees. A rigid in office for 5 days a week seems like a surefire way to repel applicants, but maybe I'm wrong. My company, as most companies probably did, had some young folks fresh out of school start work during the pandemic, and work from home is all they've ever known. So even the hybrid model doesn't make sense to them if they don't really have a purpose to be in the office. If they can work mostly or largely independently, I can't imagine that working from the office for 5 days a week will ever appeal to those who have had exposure to a flexible arrangement. As I stated, my company went, as of a few weeks ago, to a hybrid model. So twice a week, I trudge into the office for 2 mostly full days. I'd be lying if I said I'm completely okay with it. It doesn't make sense to me. It seems arbitrary on some level. Sure, my company included sells the hybrid model as allowing for collaboration, exposure, and culture building. I'm willing to bet that most of those forced back into the office see right through that. Now, for some, I do get it. It makes sense to be in the office periodically. For teams, like a software team building a product, I get that being in the office and being around your team makes sense some of the time. In my line of work, I work with teams around the globe. So for the past 2 weeks, when I go into the office, I sit in my office in solitude working via Teams, Microsoft Teams, with groups around the world. The only interactions I've had with the people there physically in the office location with me are exchanging pleasantries and, listening to other people complain about returning to work when it doesn't make sense. So why drive into the office to sit alone and work with people via Microsoft Teams around the globe? I'm not certain. It doesn't make sense to me. Having said that, I do recognize the power structure and can happily agree to 2 days a week in office. After all, it could be 5 days a week. I do interface with some senior leadership in my company, and a few of those folks have asked me what my thoughts were on the change, because I do meet with them quite a bit. I think most of them feel the same way, but they can't really say it out loud, and they're compelled to, enforce this move due to the current climate of U.S. corporate culture. There are also those who are completely against remote work. One senior leader was vocally an opponent of work from home in any capacity. He's nearing retirement, and he feels that since he had to be in office for his entire career, others should have too as well. Now, this is not an objective position. I think we need to acknowledge that there was a world-changing event that happened that showed us work doesn't necessarily have to fit into the constraints of an in-office 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. While the worker wants to stay home, the bosses want some in-office activity, so a hybrid schedule or middle-of-the-road solution is probably the best solution. But it's funny to think that if COVID never happened, we would still be going in 5 days a week, not thinking any other way about work. And if there was no event like that from here until the end of time, or until AI takes over all the jobs, people would have kept going into the office. Then there's the question of commercial real estate, the commercial real estate market, which is in major trouble unless companies revert to in-office work. It's hard to see a way out for those building owners unless they convert those buildings for other purposes. There was an article in the New York Times recently titled, "It's Not My Job to Save the Commercial Real Estate Market." More recently, the Wall Street Journal ran an article about a booming economy in Atlanta that can't even save its commercial real estate sector because of what work from home has done to that market. The point is that commercial real estate is a large factor in the U.S. economy, and if that market crumbles, what are the implications? Now, my wife's company consolidated a year or so into the pandemic from multiple floors in an office building to one floor. And it's working well for them. I can't imagine they'll want to go back to a larger lease and spend money where they don't need to. I, like the folks profiled in that New York Times article, don't think it's the worker's job to save the office economy, especially once you've seen the other side. So, whatever our collective situation is, I think those of us who worked exclusively in office pre-pandemic and as a result of COVID-19 have gotten used to working from home, we've seen the other side, and I don't think there's any getting the genie back into the bottle. Now, everyone's situation is obviously different, but working from home has given me hundreds, if not thousands, of hours with my daughter that I wouldn't have had if I was in the office. Time saved on commutes, being stuck in traffic, staying late at the office, that all went to a much more worthwhile cause. Naturally, I value that time well above being in office for exposure or culture building. Some of the senior leaders I've discussed it with acknowledge that fact too. But the corporate winds are blowing towards some semblance of pre-COVID office life, and we're largely at the mercy of those dictating those changes. I think all you can hope for is some level of flexibility. To some extent, it will always feel like an arbitrary move going back into the office, but to go back to a complete back in office for 5 days a week feels like a simple power grab or power move. But again, it's wild to think that if COVID didn't happen, we would still be going in like we used to be. So just some immediate thoughts on after having been back in the office for 2 weeks. I do largely work alone. I know a lot of people that do that same thing to where there's no really no collaboration for them when they go into the office. So, but having been back in for 2 weeks, it's really difficult to see the merit of being there other than general human interaction. And I'm not trying to be cynical. I do get human interaction outside of work. I know there are those who don't. But I would say what is noticeable are the worst aspects of what white-collar work is and office culture. The time wasted in casual or superficial conversation is enough to make me see that working from home is every bit as efficient as working in the office. Now, I get that some folks need structure, and there are certainly those who took advantage of work from home. I know some personally, and I think they should certainly be held accountable as they would be if they were in the office and not working. But other issues are office politics, which has already reared its ugly head. Snide comments, you hear about these things. I've already heard them, 2 weeks back in. All those bad things about corporate culture. But this is where we are. And while I don't necessarily agree with the state of things, the situation or work requirements could always be less flexible than it is. So I will deal with these things I don't care for 2 days a week in office if it means I can retain 3 days a week at home and get to spend that time in more meaningful ways that I would be spending in traffic. Also this week, I wanted to highlight some things that caught my eye around the web. The first is a new series from the New York Times called Being 13. The New York Times published the first in a series of articles in this project called Being 13. As you might have guessed, the project focuses on what it's like being 13 in the age of the smartphone. Now, having a daughter who will soon be a teenager, still a ways away, but it'll come quick. These things interest me now as I'm frightened for the world she'll be in. Given how difficult it was being a teenager pre-smartphones, pre-technology, it's frightening to think about kids trying to come up today, having to deal with that. Not only the pressures from their school, but from everybody on the internet as well. So the main article, which was published already, focuses on 3 13-year-old girls. I think the New York Times followed those girls for about a year and just how much of their lives are wrapped up in their smartphones. We've talked previously about mental health and depression amongst teenagers, especially teenage girls. This article, while acknowledging that the science isn't completely settled on smartphones and teen depression, it certainly lays out the case for how detrimental smartphones can be for them. And we may cover this series more in the future. We'll see how far the New York Times takes this project. The second thing that caught my eye was an article from CNBC on Airbnb. So Airbnb created an AI model to flag users that were likely booking a property to throw a party. Now, if I was an Airbnb property owner, I would certainly want to know that. This AI looks at hundreds of variables, including 1, reservations nearing or near a person's birthday, 2, short reservations during a holiday, 3, time of booking, very last minute is a red flag, 4, entire homes only for a single night, and 5, bookings near where a guest already lives. The anti-party AI model was launched in May of this year, and more than 320,000 guests have been blocked or redirected from booking attempts. So that's an interesting use of AI, so it's going to be interesting to see how this is used in other venues as well. The next thing that caught my eye was I was watching football over the weekend and kept noticing these ads from IBM touting their AI-powered Watson X. This commercial, I think there were several variations of this commercial in which they highlighted different professions that their AI-powered Watson X could help. IBM is, of course, looking to integrate their AI with every business. And I'm paraphrasing here, but it said something to the effect of, when you Watson X your business, you can help build AI to help coders code faster, customer service respond quicker, employees handle repetitive tasks in less time. Of course, all of this is true. It certainly will help you become more efficient. And as all software providers begin to push this technology onto their customers, it will be interesting to see just how efficient it makes us. Of course, the idea I've been pushing for the duration of this podcast is that the more efficient we get, there's only so much optimization you need until less folks are needed. And that's sort of step one into AI replacing us in our work. We'll see if that theory holds. The biggest thing that caught my eye was an announcement from OpenAI regarding ChatGPT. That announcement was that ChatGPT can now see, hear, and speak. You heard that right. Announced early this week, ChatGPT users will be able to have voice conversations with ChatGPT and can include images in the conversations. The AI will be able to converse and discuss pictures in real time. Think of the implications of that for a minute or two. And I think, that as impressive as ChatGPT was, especially version 4, this version, I think, may be the most impressive by far when you think about the applications that can be used with that, especially when it comes to robotics. I have not yet tried this version of ChatGPT as they're rolling this out over the next week or two. But by the next time we meet, I will have used it. And so should be able to talk about it then. So that's it for this week. Next time, I'm not exactly certain what we're going to talk about at this point. I do have a few ideas. We'll see how that goes. I am going to go over some listener questions that have been piling up. But in the meantime, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. You can do it with just a few clicks in the app you're using at this very moment. If you want to be even more deliberate, you can share this episode via text, email, or however you share things with your friends. Thanks for listening. We'll talk next time.